Okay, it is 3:30, so we're going to get started. Welcome everybody. My name is Galen. We're going to start with a prayer and a welcome by Cowichan elder Lucy Thomas. But unfortunately, Lucy isn't actually to be here because today is her birthday. And she found out just this morning that her family had been planning a surprise birthday for her. So she apologized and she sent along a message and she asked us to read it. So Katya's going to read that. I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Katya, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Galen. What I'm about to read was written and sent by Lucy Thomas. Good day, my name is Lucy Thomas. I am a Cowichan elder that lives in the community. I want to welcome you to Cowichan territory, the warm lands of the Cowichan people. Creator, grandmothers, and grandfathers, hear my prayer for this special event and that my friend Galen is hosting. I ask that you shine a protective light on the people who are here today. Alistair, Sonia, Mayor Staples, give them guidance, strength, and wisdom. Creator, I also ask that you give us a vision for our future, the vision of our children, the vision that they are the most important. And in dealing with this, may we be stronger for it, learn from it, and continue on with life. Creator, I ask that you blanket the world today with love, warmth, and less stress and worries. May we proceed with caution, and out of this will come good habits for everyone. While you are at it, Creator, please watch over everyone I love and care about in this big world. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you, Katya. And let's just send a thank you out there to Lucy and a very happy birthday to her. It's nice that she can be with her family today, or at least virtually. And I see lots of hands going up. Um, I know that many of you in the community know Lucy Thomas because she's a really active and generous part of the community. So for those of you who know her and perhaps you didn't know it was her birthday, send her a text or an email or send her some message of gratitude and happy birthday. So now that we've begun, I'll introduce myself. My name is Galen Armstrong. I'm the Western Canada organizer with For Our Kids. For Our Kids is a network of parents and grandparents across Canada working to address climate change. So I'm speaking to you from my home, of course, here in Satlam, just west of Duncan on Cowichan territory. I think most of you are calling in from the Cowichan Valley, so you'll know where Satlam is. The event today is co-hosted by our group, by our network For Our Kids, also by One Cowichan and the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians. And so I'm one of two co-hosts today, along with Katya, who you just heard from. And I'll turn it back over to you, Katya.
Aisquale, Einthu Katia Bannister, Itzintato Kunaso Hokominum. Good day, my name is Katia Bannister and I'm learning how to speak Hokominum. I live on the unceded ancestral territory of the Coast Salish and Hokominum speaking people, specifically the Penelkut tribe. I am a 16-year-old youth climate activist, community organizer, environmentalist, and young ecologist. I am also the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians crew leader. We are a group of socially and environmentally aware youth who organize community events, speak, and raise awareness about local and global issues. So to start us off, we hope that you are all healthy and doing well in these very strange times. I'm very excited about our town hall today with everything happening in the world right now. It couldn't be timelier. Today, we are joined by representatives at 3 levels of government: Mayor Michelle Staples of the City of Duncan, MLA Sonia Furstenau representing the Cowichan Valley in the legislature, and MP Alistair MacGregor representing Cowichan, Malahat, Langford in Ottawa. I'm going to quickly explain today's format and then we'll get started. First, we'll hear remarks from each of our presenters, starting with Duncan Mayor Michelle Staples. They'll each have a few minutes to speak on green recovery. The rest of the time will be for questions and answers. You can put your questions into the chat box at any time and we will collect them, group them, and ask them to our speakers.
Awesome. Thanks, Katya. And if you haven't already located it, please find your chat box. And I'm going to just type a little hello message there right now, so it'll help you find it. I'm saying, hello, please say where you're from and what brings you hope. There you go. So find your chat box, please. If you are willing, share where you're from, and if you can share what's bringing you hope in these trying times. I think it's nice for us all to kind of share with each other what's bringing us hope. Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's battery storage advancements, maybe it's the existence of ice cream, whatever it is. So, what is green recovery and why are we talking about it today? So, COVID-19 has given us a real glimpse into what planetary crisis can look like and does look like. We're all experiencing it differently in different ways, which is true of any crisis. And for those of us who are parents or grandparents, I think that we can't help thinking about the climate crises that are happening and the climate crises to come. So we've all been through smoky wildfire summers here in BC, and some of us have experienced floods or droughts or landslides in BC. And so as we recover from COVID and as the economy recovers, how do we keep climate in mind? How do we think about when we're moving into a future in our future economy? What does it look like? How are we going to reduce emissions? How are we going to be more resilient? Thankfully, the Canadian and the provincial governments are putting billions of dollars into economic recovery, and so I think we might hear a little insight into that today from our representatives. How they spend that money is crucial, and it really will determine whether we're able to protect our planet and our children from harm, from climate harm, as well as from pandemic harm and the economic harms that come with it. So the green recovery, or some people call it the just recovery. There's other names for it. The name doesn't really matter. What matters is it's taking our situation as an opportunity. It's not leaving anybody behind. It's bringing everybody together and building or rebuilding our parts of our economy and our society in a just, fair, ecologically sound way. We need to invest in healthcare. We could be building renewable energy projects that haven't been invested in. We could be doing so much more in retrofitting homes and buildings. I'm talking to you from a very old house here that we're working on improving. So there's lots of ideas on the table, and we want to hear from the people on this call, especially the people, of course, from the Cowichan Valley, what your ideas are. So most of today will be about question and answer. I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over back to Katya, but I do want to mention that if you're calling in today and you're not from the Cowichan Valley, welcome. Thank you for being here, and please consider organizing your own Green Recovery Town Hall wherever you are. You can go to forourkids.ca and you can actually see a really easy to follow step-by-step guide. So I recommend that you do that, and thank you.
All right, so I'd like to introduce today's first presentator, Mayor Michelle Staples. Michelle Staples is a long-term Cowichan Valley resident, a mother and self-employed entrepreneur with a long history of bringing people together on projects that are important to the Cowichan Valley. Michelle Staples was first elected as councillor in 2011, and after 2 terms on council in 2018, Michelle Staples became the first female mayor of the city of Duncan. So welcome, Michelle.
Oh, just a second. I don't think I'm unmuted now. Okay, excellent. So I'll just start again. So thank you so much for hosting this event for all of us today. And thank you for everything that you're doing and for, I guess, just the way that you bring a different kind of life to this conversation, all of you. I just really appreciate it. And one of the things that I think that I've been thinking about a lot is, you know, at a local level, what are those things that we can do moving forward? And I feel like it all kind of comes back to some pretty basic things. And they're things that we've actually seen a lot of during this time. They're those things of community building. They're those things of connecting and recognizing everything that's around us and the value of the places that we live and the people that live in them. It's how people take care of each other. It's how all of a sudden, you know, in our own yard, we had dirt and gravel and everything delivered because we decided to use some of the time, not that I've had much time, but other members of my household have, to start to get back outside, to finally, you know, build the garden that we've always wanted to have. And what ended up happening was neighbors and kids and different people came over, and you know, keeping distance and doing all those things that were so foreign to us came together in a way that we never had in our neighborhood before. And we've had so many experiences like that just on the street that I live on. And I've heard of that happening everywhere, you know, and I feel like that is the way forward through all of this. Yes, you know, there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of looking at how we build our way out of this, that Alistair in particular will hopefully be sharing with us today about some of the federal initiatives that'll help us do this as a country. And we know that it's the ways that we form community and the ways that we come together that kind of push out to how we're willing to do things. And so I feel like to sit here today and to say in my introduction, this is how I believe we should do things. I feel like really what I would rather ask is the question of how are we going to do these things together, and what are we committed to actually doing? Are we all going to be okay with just going back to the way things were? Are we going to use this as an opportunity? The risk is being taken for us. You know, the risk of changing literally everything and the way that things have been, the normal that we've all become accustomed to, that nobody really knew how to break away from. How do we start building something different when we're every day having to deal with the realities of what we already have? And this break has happened. And while we look at rebuilding, how do we take those things that we need to transition us into a new way of being, and not have them embedded in our daily lives anymore? Recognize that there's still things that we're going to need through this transition, but recognize that this is the time that we can actually start to make it in a really meaningful way. And that those ideas are going to come from all of us. But the biggest part of this, I think, is that we remember all of these things that have happened in the past 8 weeks. All of these things that that we have had to do differently because of something that was completely out of our control, and how it made us feel when we came together to do them. Because that's what's going to lead us into another direction. And so I'm happy and excited to be a part of this conversation today. I'm excited to hear from everyone. I'm excited to hear about the possibilities that from the province and the federal governments. They're the ones that really determine a lot of the policies that we have, and can invest the money in ways that will allow us to create a different way forward that really looks at the earth as something different than we've looked at it before, that allows us to build an economy that's based on, you know, on moving forward in a new way. And so I'm really excited to hear about some of those things. And I really am hoping that that is going to be a lot of the direction from those levels of government, because as a region, as an island, I sit on a Vancouver Island climate change caucus, and we've been working on this conversation for a long time. What do we do as an island to start to change? And so now I ask, what do we do as a country, but what are we willing to do as individuals? And how can we use this to continue to come together? So thank you.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Very insightful. And I'd just like to remind everyone to post your questions and comments down in the comments below, so that we can, in the chat below, sorry, so that we can get back to them later and you can ask questions and have your voice heard and add to the conversation. So we'll now go to our next presenter, MLA for Cowichan Valley, Sonia Furstenau. Sonia Furstenau was elected as a member for the Cowichan Valley in 2017. She is the House Leader for the BC Green Party and currently sits on 6 parliamentary committees, including the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth and the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. So welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, Katja, and Galen. I just want to reiterate what Michelle said. Thank you so much for putting this together and Clearly, you've tapped into something that people want to talk about. It. I understand that this is full, this Zoom meeting, which is great to hear. I want to start from a place of just recognizing that while we're talking today about the future and about opportunities, that the reality in the moment we're in is also a very serious one. And it has been heartbreaking for so many people. Thousands of people in Canada have lost their lives, and many, many more who have been infected by COVID may have recovered, but they may not be the same again. All of us have been touched by this. We're all experiencing impacts to our well-being, the isolation, the impacts to our mental health. And so I think it's really important that in the midst of this conversation, we also recognize we're still very much in a world-changing event that is exacerbating in some ways so many of the inequalities that we would want to fix coming out of this. And so when I was thinking about today and where I wanted to start, you can see on the shelf behind, I've been doing these Zoom meetings from my house for, as Michelle pointed out, we've all been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and I've got this shelf of books from when I studied history and my husband studied history. And I started today by reading an article. And Galen, when you said what gives me hope, I'm going to share this article in the chat box in a minute. This article gives me hope. It's by a historian named Rutger Bregman, and the title is "The Moment to Change the World is Right Now." And so it made me think about my studies as a historian and my experience teaching, and how we tend to think of the present as a kind of bubble, as a moment, and we often don't spend a lot of time reflecting on both the past, which has gotten us to this moment exactly where we are, but also that what decisions and actions we take in this moment right now shape the future. And that our past, our present, and our future are intimately connected. And I think I want more historians involved in this conversation, because I think we have to really recognize how important it is that we do not isolate our moments in time the way we often do. And when I think about decisions in the past, I look at the last 40 years in particular in Western society, and they've delivered a lot of outcomes that have had a lot of people, particularly in the last decade, really question whether our institutions are serving us or whether they're failing us. And year after year, as you all know, governments have ignored the challenge and evidence of the impacts of climate change, but also the impacts of inequality, the impacts of destroying our ecosystems, and the impacts of putting the priorities of profit above the well-being of people and citizens and workers. And I look to a year ago, 2019 really was a year in which the youth around the world, many of you who are here today, oh my goodness, I will stop that from ringing. Many of you who were here today were one of the millions of youth who came out and said to governments around the world, you're not doing your job. You're not giving us a future that we should be able to be looking forward to. And I think back to teaching history, and I taught a History 12 course my first year, and we looked at all the big major events, and this is one thing to recognize. We are in this massive historical global event right now. And when we study these events, World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, the Great Depression, the Cold War, the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the Civil Rights Movement, the Women's Rights Movement, we looked at all of these events, and then at the end of the year, I said to my students, I want you to write me an essay about whether you think the 20th century was a century of despair and discord, or was it a century of progress and hope? And the students, I also told them there's no right answer. Historians, you make a case, and you take the evidence and you make that case. And the students came back and they all acknowledged there was a lot of despair. There was a lot of tragedies of the 20th century. But on the whole, what they found, and this was so beautifully articulated by Martin Luther King Jr., which is, let us realize that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so then today we're talking about how we have bent the curve of COVID-19 here in BC and across Canada. And the work that lies in front of us is to bend the arc of history now towards justice out of this. And so we absolutely have to build a kinder, more compassionate world, recognizing that our debt in every decision we make right now, that our debt is to the future, is to future generations, and to shaping a world out of this that is better than the world that came into this. And so I'll just do a couple high-level points, and I'm really looking forward to questions, and we can get into specific policies, but basically, we can't return to business as usual. It was failing to meet our climate targets. It was failing to tackle the issue of inequality, and it was creating an unequal society. This pandemic has also made it clear that we need to improve resiliency and self-sufficiency. We need a supply chain here in British Columbia. We need to recognize that we need that resiliency, but also we need resiliency in terms of food security and energy security. And we have to look at how money is spent every dollar. And one of the things that we've done as our caucus is to create a values framework and to put it to government to say, if you're making decisions, look at a framework that says, is this decision going to achieve sustainability or more equality or better health and well-being for people? And that framework needs to be what informs our decisions. And recognizing that the younger generations are definitely going to be carrying the burden of all these decisions we make. Finally, we can't continue to bail out any fossil fuel companies. We cannot move down that path anymore, that we have to work to a just transition for workers, but also recognizing there is so much opportunity to lean into the technology of clean energy in the future, but also technology across the board. And then, as Michelle said, you know, we also have to very much focus on our local communities. And one of the phrases that that was ringing around today is a closer to home approach, where instead of looking at, can I buy something online at the cheapest price? Let's look at, can I support the local business that means so much to my community, that employs me and my friends, and that supports a local economy? And let's make those decisions that really make our community healthier and wealthier in the truest sense. So I'm looking forward to talking more about specific policies that can be brought in at the provincial level, but just as a high level kind of context of this, looking at it from a historical perspective.
Right, thank you, Sonia. Very well articulated, very insightful. And if anyone has any questions, just remember to put them in the chat below and we'll be sure to get to them. So lastly, we'll hear from our MP for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, Alistair MacGregor. Alistair is a strong advocate for agriculture and lives in the Cowichan Valley with his family on a small farming property. He currently serves as the NDP's critic for agriculture, rural economic development, and is deputy critic for justice. Please go ahead, Alistair.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katia, for that introduction. And, you know, really want to express my thanks for all of the organizations, our Cowichan, For Our Kids, Earth Guardians, for putting this on. And also give a shout out to my fellow panelists, Michelle and Sonia. The three of us sit together on the Cowichan Leadership Group. So we're staying in touch with one another on a weekly basis. And I very much value their contributions to tonight, but also to serving the different areas that they're responsible for. You know, it's been a whirlwind these last couple of months, and it's sometimes hard to really keep track of how much has just changed since this crisis became what it was in mid-March. I mean, how many of us can remember the Australian bushfires that started this year off in 2020? That seems like it happened eons ago, when it was only, in fact, a number of months. And I use that point just to illustrate the fact that, you know, we're in a very acute crisis right now. And as has been mentioned, we have a lot of people in our community, in our province, and right across Canada who are hurting. And I've seen that especially in my constituency office. We have a lot of people who are very uncertain about what the future holds. They're not sure as to whether their business will be back up and running, and they're not entirely sure whether there will be jobs there for them when we get out of this. And I guess why I wanted to illustrate the Australian bushfires example at the beginning of this is because it's important for us to remember that while we're going through this crisis, we have to acknowledge climate change is still going on in the background. And that is ultimately going to be the defining issue of the 21st century. Now, what the COVID-19 crisis has really exposed, not only in Canada, but around the world, is several very glaring weaknesses. We see a huge weakness in our social safety net. We see just how many Canadians are struggling in part-time, precarious, low-income jobs. And in very many cases, these are the people we're depending on right now in essential services to actually keep our economy on the life support it's at. So when you see people working at the grocery store, people doing all of those essential service tasks, they are the ones who are really the unsung heroes at this moment. And we have to acknowledge that. We can also see that in our global supply chains, the weaknesses there, the fact that we as a Western society have become far too reliant on offshore production. It's very much put into question our ability to manufacture things to provide for our own needs. Speaking as the agriculture critic, you know, we live in a country that is blessed with a huge landmass, incredible agricultural opportunities from coast to coast to coast. And yet, despite this abundance of food, we still have so many food insecure communities right across Canada. And that's one of the odd things about living in this country is we still have so many people who are struggling to put a plate of good quality food in front of themselves each and every day. And yet we now have farmers who are struggling to sell a surplus of produce. So that's one of the things that have very much been identified. I think from my point of view, you know, it can sometimes be weird operating in Ottawa. We feel in the House of Commons, you're sometimes operating from 30,000 feet and, you know, you kind of see the entire country as a whole. And policies from Ottawa tend to require close cooperation with the various provinces, but also our municipalities. There is a huge role for Ottawa to play because of the financial firepower that it can bring, but also because Ottawa is the place where we can coordinate a national response. So from my point of view as your federal representative, what is a green recovery? Well, I'll start with a few broad concepts. I think it's very much a rebalancing of our priorities. I think it's very much about establishing a new normal. You know, I often hear the phrase like, you know, we need to return to normal as quickly as possible. Well, you know, normal was long-term care homes where seniors were not getting adequate care. Normal was too many people not able to access benefits when they became unemployed. Normal was just not good enough in so many ways. And, you know, I've been fond of saying that our pursuit of environmental justice, it's not going to be successful unless we also pay attention to social justice and economic justice. The green recovery is going to require a massive effort. And we're lucky right now, in a way, you know, I'm trying to look for the bright side in all of this. COVID-19 has essentially pressed the pause button on our society. It's allowed us the opportunity to really have that time with our family, but also to really think about the state of the world that was, the state of the world that is, and what the state of the world could be. And so in refocusing those priorities and establishing a new normal, I think we have an incredible opportunity to really ponder what it is that we truly value in our communities, you know, figuring out ways that we can build resiliency. And, you know, that's why I'm so pleased to be on here with Michelle and Sonia, because we all have roles to play. I think from Ottawa's perspective, the making sure that infrastructure money flows out in a way to shovel-ready projects, but also making sure that we have that clear environmental lens, that we're pursuing things like electrification, getting rid of our federal fossil fuel subsidies, trying to make sure that we have that electric vehicle fleet. There are so many incredible ways that can be that we can be engaging in, and that's why it's a real privilege and an honor for me to not only represent this area, but to also be a part of this discussion, because I see a lot of familiar faces on the screen in front of me. And I know that we are very blessed in this area to have a lot of people who very much care deeply about these issues, but more importantly, are very much willing to offer their suggestions and comments on the way forward. So I'll leave it at that, because I really want to hear some of the questions that come tonight. But I'll end just by thanking all of you for participating tonight. And you know, let's not make this the end of the conversation. We have a lot of time before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. We've heard a lot of interesting points, and already I see that people have been writing questions in the chat box. First, we kind of wanted to give the youth voices an opportunity to shine. So one of my fellow Earth Guardians, Jasmine, is going to be asking the first question for us today. So Jasmine, you can unmute.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Hashe. I'm from the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians. My question is about the talk that we've been hearing about universal basic income coming out of the pandemic. There has been some small-scale studies that have said that universal basic income would help our environment because it separates the line between work and consumption. Do you guys have any personal thoughts on that, or what do you think that your levels of government have to do with that, and do you think that it will benefit the island BC? Yeah.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm just going to jump in and say that some of the questions have been directed to one of you in particular, but this sounds like one that any of the three of you can just go ahead and jump in on.
I'm happy to start. Basic income is something that I've spent a lot of time on in the last few years. It was part of our platform, so it's very interesting to see it being discussed in the way it is now, very much being recognized as a solution. And even this morning on CBC, there was a conversation between an advocate for basic income and a former advisor to the Federal Conservative Party, and basically both of them were agreeing that basic income has a role to play right now. From what you said, Jasmine, that there have been studies, absolutely. There's been the Manitoba one is the most famous study in Canada, but there's also been an Ontario pilot that had been started. And here in BC, we have a basic income panel that's been doing some pretty significant research and analysis. It's headed by 3 economists, and they're going to be putting out an interim report this summer and a final report later this year that will provide what I expect from what I've seen so far, an extraordinary amount of analysis and research about how basic income can be implemented in a way that achieves the outcomes that that have been identified as wanting to be achieved. And public health is one of the outcomes of basic income, in that economic security is a foundational piece of public health. So if people have the security to be able to make good decisions about their day-to-day lives, we will have overall a healthier society. And also what we've seen, and this is coming out in the research and the analysis, is that the current income support and social security support kind of realm is very complex and can be very hard to navigate. And Alistair, you and I would know this very much from our constituency offices, and Michelle, you are absolutely on the ground with this, that people accessing support and services is sometimes so difficult for them. And there are a lot of barriers and impediments. So one of the ideas around a basic income approach is to say, let's remove those barriers and impediments and provide that basic level of economic security so that people can then begin to make longer term decisions about their lives and begin to thrive more easily than they can under the current models. I'll leave it with that, and I'm happy to hear from Alistair and Michelle on this as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Jasmine. You cut out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. Like for me, like one of the frustrations with the programs that have been rolled out federally during this crisis is that um, we have, every time a new program's been rolled out, we've found a number of people who have fallen through the gaps. And so we continuously were pushing for the eligibility criteria to be expanded. And that's why right from the get-go, my caucus was advocating for a universal benefit that went to every man, woman, and child for $2,000. And we worry about who's eligible later, because we recognize that the crisis was very acute at the moment, and the important thing was to give people a sense of confidence and the assurance that the government had their back. Now going forward, I think absolutely universal basic income is something that does need to be studied, because what this crisis has really illustrated within our society is that we have so many people who are struggling to make a good wage. They're working full time, sometimes more than full time, and they still are struggling with those choices at the end of the month. Can I pay my utilities? Can I pay my rent? And can I put good quality food on the table? The fact that we live in a country as well, Canada, and we still have so many people who are struggling with those basic choices is a shameful thing. And, you know, Sonia is very right. Our two offices are often working with the same constituent because they have federal and provincial problems. And I have sat across the table both as a caseworker and as a member of parliament with far too many constituents who are struggling to make it by in our current system. So we can study universal basic income. We can look at things like making sure that we have a national universal pharmacare plan, making sure that the federal government is leading the way with a national standard on minimum wages to make sure that the provinces are following suit, all of these things. But we certainly need to have a major reset on what we're expecting people to actually live on and sustain the necessities of life.
I think I'll just add a bit about what we've noticed during this time is going into what is considered an essential workforce, and recognizing that the people that we've been relying on for the past 8 weeks, a large portion of those people barely make enough to survive. And so there was a lot of struggles with one of our local employment organizations who was trying to match people that were working with different jobs that were available, because people just simply couldn't survive off of minimum wage jobs. And so I feel like what this has also done is really kind of made us stop and appreciate in a different way things that we've taken for granted. And recognizing that when it comes down to the basics of it, we all need food and we need shelter. Those are two key things that we need for basic survival. And those are, during this crisis, those are, and I'll speak primarily right now to that food service network of people. Those are the people right now that, given something like guaranteed income moving forward, if we ensure that people's basic needs can be met, I'm a firm believer that people need to do something and believe in something in their lives, to be involved in their community, to be involved in taking care of each other. I think that of most people, that's a fundamental part of our humanity. And so for all of those people to continue to work through this, providing guaranteed income, to me, moving forward, it helps equalize all of this. It helps us say to everyone, you know what, you're important and you're valued, and these jobs are important. And even though these jobs may only be able to provide this much, we're going to make sure that everything else is taken care of for you, to the extent where we can rely on, you can rely on knowing that your needs are met, knowing that you can go and pay the bills after if you're doing this type of work, knowing that you have enough of a base to start from, which is really all that guaranteed income does, so that you can go and move through life and be successful and be supported, and in turn support others around you. And when the Liberal government first came in, the finance minister, I believe it was, and Alistair, you just popped off my screen, but so I can't see if you're going to nod or shake your head at this, but the finance minister for the Liberal government was talking about bringing guaranteed income to proposal to the legislature, and then that was withdrawn. And I remember that because at that the position that I was working at that time, that was something that we were really interested in looking at how could, you know, us as a community be one of the pilot projects to look at how this could work. Guaranteed income has been proven to be successful, to become a real equalizer for giving people basic needs. And so I feel like that, in terms of the climate and how that connects in with the climate, when people can take care of when our basic needs are met, the way that we respond in the world and the way that we contribute to the world changes. And all of those little incremental changes influence our climate, and they influence the decisions that we make and how we live our life and where we can put our time and energy. And so I feel that guaranteed income is something that, as all Canadians, we should really advocate strongly for moving forward.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So I'm pulling up questions. We're trying to keep track of them all and encourage people to keep putting them in the chat. And if they're for a particular person, just make a note of that. So this is a question for Sonia. There's a lot of discussion and some questions around what you were saying about what you learned from history. So this is from Wade Smith. And Wade says, what I noticed is that there's a growing gap or polarity between political views and ideologies. So how do we get the other half, quote unquote, to the table? And what is the conversation to have in this more inclusive meeting?
Yeah, thanks, Wade, for that. And I have been scanning the comments, and I've really noticed a lot of conversation about the need for there to be less partisanship and less divisiveness. And I think what Alistair, how he launched by saying, you know, we work here in Cowichan with the Cowichan Leadership Group, and there's no partisanship at that table. We are all working together in service of our community, and we all want to do the very best we can, and working together is what's so important. And then I think it was, I saw someone also respond about, you know, we've seen unprecedented levels of cooperation in BC under a minority government, and having been part of that, you know, I will say at the outset that almost every pundit, you can go back to 2017 after the election, was saying, oh, this government won't last more than 6 months. There's going to be another election. There's no way there can be cooperation across party lines. And I kept saying, well, why don't you ask the people who are involved with this? Like, I'm one of the people in this, and it's my commitment to work cooperatively and work collaboratively. And one of the things we've seen in BC is that has extended across all three parties now, where there's a lot of collaboration in the legislature. There's actually a CBC article that's going to come out about this in the next day or two, really looking at this from a perspective where, for example, there's been town halls with government MLAs and opposition MLAs on health issues. And so what's important is that we start from, and I've seen compassion and love talked about in here, kindness. These are the principles and places we have to start. If this is the world we want to build, that's where we need to begin. And we need to start by being able to listen and hear other people, and being able to put our ideas forward without attacking each other. I know that for me as a woman in politics, social media doesn't feel generally like a particularly safe space. And I think we can change that if we make the commitment together. But this kind of forum, and what youth have been doing to lead, particularly in the last couple of years, really demanding of us in elected positions, but also demanding of leaders generally that we put our eye on the right prize and the right ball, which is the future of the planet and the future for all of you, and that we have to find ways to come together and work that out and how it works. Um, I'm so proud to be in Cowichan, and I think that we are in a lot of ways leading and modeling what is possible. And I think all of us are committed to continuing to do that. And just always starting from a place of compassion is going to be the most important first step.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sonia. So our next question is for Alistair from Geoff Strong, who I happen to know. Excited that you're here, Geoff. Says, Alistair, has Parliament been working any closer and cooperatively on climate issues since the current crisis, or is the major crisis even being brought up in discussion or debate?
Thank you very much for that question. The climate crisis is still there. It is still mentioned, but it certainly has been shuttled off a little to the side because we still very much are dealing with the acute phase of this crisis. I think we're sort of on the cusp of getting out of the acute phase. You know, I can see from my office the amount of casework that my staff are dealing with, the number of emails we're getting and phone calls. That people are generally pretty knowledgeable about the support programs that are in place. And I think, you know, we've been working diligently over the last couple of months in Parliament to make sure that the appropriate legislation and financial firepower is there to support these programs. So now that people are fairly aware of what's available, and there's still some work to be done, and now we're starting to get news of how various provinces are announcing their plans for reopening society and reopening the economy. Now I think you're going to start to see that gradual shift in addressing the acute phase and moving to the recovery phase. And that's why I'm really excited about this topic, what we're discussing tonight, because now is the time when we start envisioning the new type of Canada that we want to live in and the various measures that we can employ to address the climate crisis. So, you know, I was listening, there's this organization called Corporate Nights, and they're doing a series of webinars on a weekly basis. And I was listening to one, I can't remember what day of the week it is, every day seems the same. I think it was yesterday morning. And they were talking about how industry can start greening itself. And I think there's a real federal initiative that can be done, you know, in making sure that our steel production is electrified and making sure that our cement production is electrified. These are all things that we can start talking about when we're talking about the recovery phase and how we're going to start doling out that infrastructure money. If I can just add one thing quickly, one thing I have been really impressed with, though, over this time is just how, you know, to echo what Sonia said, it's amazing how our parliamentary system is now working virtually. And it just feels really silly for people to heckle over Zoom. So that is almost non-existent now. And it is incredible how all of the opposition parties and the minority liberals have really come together. That's not to say that we're not holding the government to account and offering criticism and comment where it's merited, but I think we've all realized the value in having a Team Canada approach to this crisis. And I am just, you know, overjoyed to be a part of it. It's really refreshing as a parliamentarian to expose this. It's led to a lot more job satisfaction for me. So I'm really excited, and I really hope that we can continue that spirit in the road ahead as we start talking about this recovery.
Thanks, Alistair. And I'm gonna ask a follow-up to everything you just said. And one thing I've been hearing some conversation about is how busy MPs and MLAs are right now with the COVID crisis. And there's been question about, are they just getting so many emails and phone calls that they can't keep up with it all? The sort of what I'm trying to get at is, as normal citizens, as you know, those of us on the call are, how can we participate? What can we be doing to get our messages across and our voices heard in legislature and parliament?
Yeah, you're right. It is a very busy time. I've likened it to trying to drink out of a fire hose. It's been basically information and crisis management for the last 2 months. But I would encourage. What I really like is that we are now using new communication tools like Zoom, and I really want to see more of this. In fact, I've asked my office staff to look into buying a commercial model of Zoom for my office because I want to host things like this. And I think, we have the traditional ways, a phone call and email, those are still being regularly looked at. But I really, really like this format where everyone from the comfort of their own home, we can all see one another, we can all participate in the conversation. And, I will be proactively soliciting your feedback on this, but also, receptive to anything that you're sending me in the days, the weeks, and the months ahead.
Great. Well, we may need to do some more of these. I've got a few messages from my neighbors here in North Cowichan about why isn't North Cowichan better represented here rather. Sonia, did you want to respond to that question around participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's so important for decision makers at all levels right now to be hearing widely from people who want to see a green recovery, a just recovery, who want to see inequality being solved with every decision that we're making. And the more your voices are put to a wide range of decision makers, the more we create that political will to make things happen. And I would say that, again, historically thinking, there are very few moments in time. There's been some recent polling that has come out from several different polling firms around how much of the population is keen to see transformation right now. And it's somewhere in the range of 70 to 80% of Canadians who are being polled saying that they want to see transformative policies right now. And so again, for anybody who's in an elected position, that is a directive from the population to embrace the fact that we have to make some very significant changes, and we have to look at creating outcomes that are, again, sustainable, equity-based, more equality, and then looking at a kinder, more just society that we want to create out of this. So keep your voices heard. And, as I said to Galen before we started, the articulate expression of this in media is also really important, and keep doing that.
Katya, do you have another question you want to bring forward?
Yeah, sure. So next question for anyone who wants to respond is from Heather Ferris. How are First Nations and non-First Nations needs being addressed? Please, we must actively pursue an inclusive, well-represented, non-racist agenda. Are First Nations elders being included in the leadership right now? So if there's anyone who'd like to address that.
Well, I think, Alistair, you just answered it in the chat box.
Oh, did he?
But in the Cowichan Leadership Group, Chief Seymour is a part of the group. And so that's important for all of us. But I think absolutely, we need to become far more inclusive, far more inviting of Indigenous perspectives and voices, but also more diverse voices generally. And one of the things that has caused me some distress in the last while are the uptick in racist incidents in Canada and in BC. And all of us have a responsibility to say that that is not acceptable. That is not who we are. And I think I really liked that there was some advice on some of the news outlets about what to do if you're a bystander in an episode like that of any kind of racism or discriminatory actions, is how to engage. And if you're not comfortable, one piece of advice I heard, if you're not comfortable like putting yourself in front of it, do something like throw your papers on the floor or spill your drink so that you create a distraction to kind of stop the flow of what's happening, but then speak up. All of us need to say this is not okay. This is not who we are. We are not a racist country. We are a country that is Indigenous first and foremost, and then immigrants. All of us who are not Indigenous are descendants of immigrants to this country.
Yes, I completely agree, and would echo what Sonia just talked about in terms of First Nations involvement here. I mean, I feel like it's something that we've been bridging as a community for a number of years now, and I know that we are often looked to as leaders in that area from other places. And that doesn't mean that there's still not more to do, or that things don't get missed, or that, you know, and that's a process that we're all, I believe there isn't a leader in this region who isn't committed to that process, and isn't committed to doing things better together all the time. And in terms of this past sort of 8-week period, on all of the different task forces that I've sat on to do with regional issues that we've been dealing with, there has been absolutely involvement and reaching out to all the local nations. And when people aren't able to, I'll give you one example. In the food task force, there was so much effort made to make sure over and over again that nations were being contacted to make sure that people on reserve and off reserve had the supports that they needed from the other food groups that were working together. And just sort of going through that over this past 8-9 weeks on that task force, it's been phenomenal, the relationships that have been formed, and that I guess that isn't even questioned. That is part of how we do things. And so I feel really proud at the steps that we take and continue to take to ensure that that's happening. And I also recognize that we have a long way to go, and know that we're all committed to that.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, you know, I'm very fortunate to have the relations among the Indigenous community here in this riding that I do have. I very much value the friendships and relations that I have, and the wisdom that is apparent in those relationships. You know, going to the question about whether First Nations needs are being met, we've established some very strong connections here in the Cowichan Valley. I can remember wearing the blue volunteer shirt back in 2008, and how far we've come since then with the Walk of the Nations and all of the cultural events we have. Nationwide, though, our First Nations needs being met? No, they weren't being met before this. They aren't being met now, and we still have a long way to go. This crisis has really exposed how vulnerable so many of those communities are. You know, lacking basic sanitation, basic running water, very remote access to any kind of health services, which is why they are so incredibly fearful of any person transmitting COVID-19 to their community, because it would just run through them like wildfire. And in many cases, some of these communities, they only have 2 or 3 original speakers of the language left, and they cannot afford to lose those elders. So that's the precarious situation that so many First Nation communities are in across country, and Inuit as well. And I'm very fortunate to have my colleagues Leah Gazan from Winnipeg and Mumalak Kakak, who's from Nunavut, who continue to teach me every day about their own community's experiences in all of this, and just really illustrating how much more we have to do.
Great, thank you all. Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because I think that goes back to the sort of opening intention of what I was speaking to, is that, like, how are we all going to decide what's important moving forward, and that we're voicing that? And if the things that Alistair is bringing up, right, that there are still communities that don't even have water, that all of us, it's up to us at this time to make that a priority as we move forward. Basics, let's, you know, start with that. But we all need to use our voices, every single one of us, to let every level of government, in this case the federal government, know that this is how we want this to be fixed as we're moving forward from this. We don't want communities to have to worry about those things. So what are we willing to say, and what are we willing to stand for as we move forward from this?
Great, thank you. There's the most recent question in the chat here is Cowichan Valley is blessed with such an amazing potential for creating an equitable, resilient, sustainable, bio-based economy. What is your vision and what opportunities do you see through the current crisis for achieving this? Now, I see that we're getting into the last bit here. So I would also, I think we'll probably make this the last round. So as you answer this question, if you got any other comments that you haven't had a chance to make, this would be a great time. And whoever wants to go first. Doesn't look like anyone's making eye contact with me, just kidding. So I'm gonna I'm gonna go to Alistair. Thanks.
Sure. So yeah, I see the question written there. Thank you very much, Brian. We're very fortunate to have Brian in this community and the Cowichan Energy Alternatives, and you know what that organization has been able to do over the last couple of decades with such limited resources and pioneering new ways of using what many used to think of as a waste stream and turning it into something useful. And I think, you know, looking at our local community, at the provincial level, nationally, I think one of the really key things to our economic recovery is discovering or rediscovering the circular economy. You know, the fastest growing industry in Canada right now is waste management. That's handling our waste. And in a lot of the cases when we're recycling it, we're simply sorting it out and then shipping it offshore, where they then use it and turn it into new material. If we're going to reduce our dependence on supply chains, find new economic opportunities, we really have to engage in that circular economy. And I think things like, you know, what Brian's doing with Cowichan Energy Alternatives, taking that, you know, used cooking oil and turning it into biogas and biodiesel. We know there's a number of people in the Cobble Hill area who have also want to take manure and rotting food scraps, which otherwise would just release methane into the air, and turn that into biogas. So those are the kind of opportunities in making sure that we are really tackling that linear waste stream of where we use a product, we consume it, and then it's just thrown into the trash heap. We have to find a way to make sure that companies are responsible for their packaging, responsible for the products that they make, that we're putting in standards with what materials that they're making it with, so that we have a way of reusing it easily, or at least breaking down the components and manufacturing those into new things. So I think that can be scaled from the national level to the provincial level down to the local level. We already have examples of this being done successfully. We just need to have governments with the political will to really start engaging that full time as we work our way to this recovery.
I can go next, and thanks, Alistair. That's, you know, I think that when I think of that question, and Brian, you know, I always call you Biodiesel Brian. You are a great asset to our community, CEA, all of the members. It's such a great example of what can be achieved, as Alistair's saying. I think about, and this will be a shock to so many of you, but I think about watersheds a lot. And if we were to begin to conceptualize our decision making as being watershed based, and this really reinforces what Alistair is saying, then we start to say, okay, everything in the watershed has a purpose and has to be protected in order to provide the role that it plays. And if we started to conceptualize about all of our decision making and how do we ensure that, as has come up so much in this conversation, basic needs are met, and water is the most, well, after air, the most foundational one. We need air, we need water, we need food, we need shelter. And so when we start to ask ourselves, how do we go forward? Well, another example where we could be looking at circular economy, as Alistair pointed out, is looking at if we're going to do a retrofitting, as you mentioned at the beginning, Galen, and recognizing that we can reduce our energy costs and energy needs by making our houses and where we work and live much more efficient. There's a company in Vancouver that that works and when they, for example, if a house is torn down, they are able to save like 99% of the material in that house and reuse it, as opposed to sending all of that to the landfill and starting again with brand new materials. And in fact, and this is the thing that's so kind of shocking, is that it costs less. It costs less to have your house taken apart piece by piece by this company than it costs to have your house demolished and thrown into a truck and put into the landfill. So if we started to think about the preciousness of everything that we're using, and if we imagined it, you know, if we're only using it from our own watersheds, that would begin to inform, okay, do I really need this thing, or how can I reuse it, or how can I save it or protect it? And I think, you know, being more connected to the ecosystems that we all rely on and depend upon as we move forward into this recovery period that we're going into, and kind of reharmonizing, recapturing that balance that is so essential to all of us thriving, is going to be, it's going to have to be a central piece of how we're doing this. And I think, you know, organizations like CEA and people like Brian and so many of our local businesses and local entrepreneurs have already made so much of a foundational piece for us for this in Cowichan, and we can absolutely build on that. So I'm like, and I'll put the link to the Bregman article. He says, as a historian, he may not be feeling totally optimistic, but he does feel hopeful, and I feel very hopeful about the future right now.
Thank you.
So I think the only thing that I can add to that, sort of very well spoken from both of you about that, and looking at the circular economy, is what I think often is of what if. We're on an island. You know, I think what if all my life living on the coast and growing up on the coast, I've been told that there's an earthquake coming, that the big one is coming. Now it hasn't come. But something else has come, something that was never ever told to me that it would be possible. And it's arrived at our doorstep at warp speed, really. And so it's made me really reflect a lot on, well, what if we had that earthquake? What if we were cut off as an island from everything else? What would we do to, you know, what are the basic things that we would need on our island, in our communities? And so what if we decided to move forward building that, and we did that one community at a time? We're lucky because we're on an island. We could conceivably do that as an island and smaller islands that we're a part of. We could actually conceivably do that and create an economy where, what if we had that earthquake? What if we had another event like this? What would we want to have in place? What would we ensure was in place so that we didn't only have 3% of our food produced here anymore? What if we had enough food produced here for everyone on this island? What if we had enough to share and to trade? Should that be the way that something that would go? And so that would be the question that I always ask, is as we're moving forward, if we ask the question, what if? And then we keep expanding it out from our own lives, our personal lives, our homes, our communities, our island, our province, our country. And we don't say but anymore. We just say, what if? And we start to solve those things. Then we can create something different that creates health, ecological wellness, personal wellness, that supports business, that we don't have to leave anyone or anything out to do this. That's the thing that divides us when we start to have those conversations. The what if, you know, we included everyone as part of how we move forward, and let everyone know that not only is there a place for you in this conversation, in building something that is will sustain us for generations, but that you're all a fundamental part of creating that, every single one of us. So what if we come out of this better than we ever could have imagined?
Thank you, Michelle, for closing on that note. That was very, very powerful. I'd just like to say that this is all the time that we've had for today. So thank you so much to all of our panelists who have come. You've given us a lot of good tools for addressing the crisis that we find ourselves in. So thank you for taking the time to answer the rapid fire questions. They're very tricky. Before I pass it off to Galen to close, I'd just like to say what a privilege it is for myself to be here as a co-host, as a youth voice, as a youth representative. It's really special to me, and it's really special to get to see all the people in the comments who are saying very positive things about youth and our climate activism movement. So on that note, if you want to keep up to date about what the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians are doing in the future, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And it's just at CV Earth Guardians. So please check us out, and you can give us comments about what you thought of our event here today, because we're hoping to organize some more webinars in the future. So thank you all, Heitska, and passing it on to Galen.
Thank you, Katya, and yeah, thanks again to all of the speakers, all three of you today. I was just thinking that listening to you, it feels like we're listening to leaders, but not politicians. Like everything that you have said today just sounds so real, and I really appreciate that. I think we're really lucky to be living where we live, to be able to have leaders and representatives. Truly, you're a representatives in government, and I feel like you're doing the job very, very much in good faith. So thank you. And Katya, thank you so much for co-hosting and doing the bulk of the hosting and work. You were so impressive. And behind the scenes, there were three others from the Cowichan Valley Earth Guardians who were making this thing run smoothly. So thanks to them, to Isaac and to Jasmine. And finally, I want to say there's people asking how you can get more involved. Earth Guardians, as Katya mentioned, one Cowichan you can find on social media. You can go to forourkids.ca. Again, for those who are outside of the Cowichan Valley, if you're listening in, host a town hall. If you're in a municipality of North Cowichan and you want to do one of these, we can absolutely do another one of these here. So get in touch with us at forourkids.ca. I also wanted to thank Lucy Thomas again and wish her a happy birthday and thank her for taking the time to send in the opening that she sent to us.